Indiana at Ohio State. We'll be getting the playoff rankings as of tonight, and I would imagine both these teams will probably be in the top 5, considering they were in the top 5 last week as well. It's a noon Eastern time game on Fox. The storyline to know is pretty simple. The winner of this game essentially clinches a spot in both the Big Ten title game, and you can pretty much say they'll be locking up a college football playoff spot as well. Michigan, Ohio State plays Michigan at the end of the year. Purdue plays Indiana. Indiana plays Purdue at the end of the year. So as long as they win that last game, they'll be into the Big Ten title game, obviously. So the winner of this game would pretty much guarantee itself a spot in the college football playoff, because Indiana would have, at worst, an 11-1 record. They would have a signature win over Ohio State as well. Ohio State would, at worst, be 10-2 if they lose to Michigan, say, and they would have also beaten Penn State and Indiana. The loser of this game, though, say if Indiana goes 11-1 with this loss and Ohio State goes 10-2 with this loss, then all of a sudden you're being lumped into the logjam of SEC schools that have 2 losses on the year. That's going to be really interesting. So I think Ohio State probably have a better chance of surviving that because of the win over Penn State, while Indiana wouldn't have really a signature win to fall back on. But it's going to be really interesting. This is a major, major game. Obviously, huge rewards for the winner, and potentially a fatal blow for the loser.
Yeah, no, it's certainly everyone's billing it to be the prove-it game for Indiana, even if they lose close, if they can be competitive enough with the Buckeyes, and they'll give them a lot of credit, obviously. And then I think what's not talked about enough for Ohio State, if they were to go down in this game, like you mentioned, they would have a second loss, and even then, still have to beat Michigan, which they haven't done in a while. I know it's not the same Michigan team we've seen the last couple of years, but you know how things go in the big game there. So I don't know that they'd want to leave it up to just that game to decide their playoff hopes.
Absolutely. So, Dawn, you have the Ohio State offense in this game, and Will Howard has been kind of on fire as of late. So what should we be looking out for in the Buckeyes of the ball?
It kind of might be an understatement. He's got the 8th best passing grade in the country, and I'll be honest with you, over the last couple of weeks, you could argue he's been their best player, and we thought this would be a team that was carried by their defense, and their defense is still arguably the best defense in the country. And then they had Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson and ride the run game and let Howard run in play action. But Howard's been really good in drop-back situations. His passing grade this year in non-play action dropbacks, 82.7, when all 4 of his years at Kansas State had hovered around 60. He was essentially just a play-action passer with the Wildcats down there, and now he's gotten into this drop-back game. Now it helps that you have Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka on the outside. You get to throw to those guys, and the threat of the run is always there with the 2 great backs that he has. But this is by far the best that Will Howard has ever played, and just played the position and made throws downfield, right? But I think when it comes to Indiana's pass defense, it's something we haven't got into yet. We talked a lot about their run defense against Michigan because, well, that was the relevant part when you're playing Michigan. But it needs to be said that this is a really good defense all the way around in the passing game as well. Now, I think it is a challenge. It's their biggest challenge by far, facing Will Howard, facing Jeremiah Smith, facing Emeka Ibuka, and I think that could be what this game comes down to. I think their front 7 can keep up with Ohio State's run game. And you talk about first that offensive line, okay? Indiana's 4th in the nation in pass rush grade, okay? Michael Kamara leads the FBS with 53 pressures, and they've got several other guys up there who can play. James Carpenter, C.J. West. They'll blitz Jalen Walker from his linebacker spot. They have ways they can get after the passer, and we know, the last couple weeks Ohio State's pass protection has been better, but they've also played Purdue and Northwestern, right? So it's something that with the injury to Josh Simmons, it really threw some things off. Since he got hurt in Week 7, Buckeyes are 115th in pass blocking grade. And if it sticks like that, now, again, the last 2 games have been better, but they haven't played any 2 teams that are nowhere near the caliber of Indiana. So up front, there's a challenge blocking Kamara and those guys. And Will Howard, obviously, there's a big drop-off when he's pressured, like most quarterbacks, than when he's in a clean pocket. The less clean pockets, the more of a problem Howard's going to have. We saw that against Penn State. Right? I mean, you got an elite pass rush in Penn State. If Indiana's on that level of pass rush with Kamara and those guys, that's one problem. The other one is Indiana in coverage. Okay, they're obviously talented, but the unique thing with their secondary, they rotate their coverages post-snap more than any team in the country. Very often showing you too high and then rotating to single high, but you don't really know which way it's rotating until the ball snapped. And they mess around a lot in the secondary with these looks. You've mentioned before, a heavy zone coverage team, but they don't show you what they're actually playing in those zone coverages until after the snap. That's an interesting part against Will Howard as well, because when you show him the defense pre-snap and he sees his first read, he's great. But when defenses rotate coverages, got a 58 passing grade. And we saw a good example of that in person at Penn State. The pick six that he threw early in the game, Tom Allen showed him cover one to start with, rotated back into two. Will missed the rotation, pick six going the other way. He's got 5 turnover-worthy plays this year when defense rotate the coverages post-snap. So I think this is a theme where Will Howard's going to have to see which way the coverage is rotating. What that also does is make the quarterback hold the football a little longer, which can help your pass rush, and a really good one. It all blends together, right? You talk about marrying the coverage with the pass rush. Well, Indiana does that as well as anybody. And it's a twofold problem for Ohio State's passing game in this game.
Yeah, and obviously that's going to be an amazing thing to watch. Is Will Howard has been really, really good lately against an Indiana pass defense has been really good as well. And Dolan's the same thing on the other side of the ball. Indiana's passing game has been one of, if not the best in the country so far, and Ohio State's had one of, if not the best defense in college football so far. Right now, Indiana has the best offensive grade in the Power 4 at 92.4. They're the best receiving grade in the country. They have the Curtis Rourke has the best passing grade in America as well. They're tied for 9th in the Power 4 in pass blocking grade. Only Ole Miss averages more EPA per pass than Indiana this year. Ohio State, though, has a number 1 defense in college football with a 94.2 defensive grade this year. They're 7th in the country in coverage grade. All 5 starters in that secondary should be drafted into the NFL either this year or next year, with Caleb Downs only being a true sophomore. And then all 4 defensive linemen as well should be drafted within probably the first 4 rounds of this year's NFL draft. And they're tied for they're 12th right now in pressure rate. So really it's kind of an unstoppable force, immovable object. So what I try to do here, my side of the preview is, okay, what was their worst game? And what happened in that worst game? So for Indiana, we actually went to their worst offensive performance. That was the 20-15 victory over Michigan. That was actually, Dawn, the only time this year that Indiana has not scored at least 31 points this season. What happened in that game? Michigan's defensive line dominated Indiana in that game. 43.8% pressure rate, 40.6 pass blocking grade. The Ohio State defensive line is not as good as the Michigan defensive line, I would say. I think the Michigan D-line is probably the best in college football, but Ohio State's at least like top 3 to 5 in college football right now. So that is easily the next best defensive line that Indiana's faced this year, so that could be a big problem for Indiana. Ohio State, their worst performance was in a 32-31 loss to Oregon a month ago. That was the only time this year that Ohio State allowed more than 17 points, was in that when they allowed 32 to Oregon. In that game, Oregon attacked the perimeter of Ohio State's defense, kind of just avoiding Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom, what I think is the best safety duo in college football. They just avoided that really altogether. Of Dylan Gabriel's 36 completions in that game, only 5 of them came within the hashes, inside the hashes. So a lot of them were down the sideline, down the field, and Denzel Burke was really the one he picked on a lot in that game. Probably the worst game of his career. He allowed all 8 of his targets to be caught for 179 yards, 2 touchdowns, a perfect or maybe imperfect passer rating when targeted for Denzel Burke, 158.3 passer rating when Denzel Burke was targeted. So I think that's another avenue too, is you got to attack the corners of Ohio State, not the safeties. And Curtis Rourke right now is the highest graded quarterback in the nation on throws outside of the numbers, but he's only 95th in attempts right now. So Indiana's offense is really predicated on that RPO game, winning over the middle of the field. I think this game, he should be looking to target more of the outside with his Ohio State corners on Saturday.
I agree with that. I think Curtis Rourke is going to have to put together a Heisman-level performance, because what I worry about with Indiana against Ohio State, you mentioned the offensive line, I'm not sure how much they're going to get out of their run game. And Tyson Lawton and Justice Ellison have been really good in the backfield for them. I thought there were stretches in the Michigan game where they were good, especially in the first half. But that was really a problem for me, is the running between the tackles for them shut down in the second half of that game. I believe, what was my number? I think they only had 18 total yards in the second half against Michigan. So I wouldn't expect it to be shut down like that, because Michigan's defensive line, like you mentioned, causes everybody problems, right?
Yes.
You have to adjust your entire game plan. And I thought for a half, Indiana was really good. They were dominating the first half of that game. Second half, it just got dragged into Michigan's tempo. So I do think that is the hardest part for me, is the front 4 against Ohio State. I'm looking at Tyleik Williams, especially between the tackles. If Indiana isn't a threat to run between the tackles, the RPO stuff gets a little less effective, because it's not actually a two-way go. You're just trying to throw the football, right? I think that's what it's going to come down to, is Curtis Rourke being honestly as special as he's been all season. He's the highest graded quarterback in the country under pressure. You mentioned outside the numbers, but they don't throw it a whole lot. We'll see if there's any adjustments made there, but I think it might even start with Curtis Rourke dropping back, throwing the football, and then working back to the run game. Because if Ohio State's stacking the box, I have a hard time thinking Indiana's going to get a ton of rushing yards on them.
Definitely. So, Dalton, in a game that will likely determine who plays Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, who will win in this top 5 matchup?
I've said for a while, I do think Indiana. I know the talk is about what the margin could be in this game and the spread and how much if Indiana loses by a lot and what happens in that scenario. I don't think they're going to lose by a lot. I think they're really good. I think they are one of the 12 best teams in the country. I'm taking Ohio State 31-24, but I think it's going to be a really good football game. I think you have 2 great defenses going at it. I think you have 2 really good quarterbacks going at it. I think Indiana's ability to stop the run themselves, or one of the best run defenses in the country, is going to be a big factor when you talk about, again, it still does start with Quinshon and Travion in the backfield and putting them in good situations, and you don't want Will Howard to always be working in 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, right? So I think both teams have 2 dimensions they can go to, but I think Ohio State is a little more balanced, and Indiana, I'm sitting on this thing where I think they're going to have a hard time running the football in this game, just like we saw in the second half against Michigan. So I'll take Ohio State by 7. I think Indiana's defense keeps them in it. I think Curtis Rourke is going to go out and have a good game. I think he would have to have a special, extremely memorable game to win this one on the road in Ohio State. But I think Indiana still proves their worth even in a tight loss.
It's the type of game that will get him to New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony. Not win the Heisman Trophy, but I think that could get him to the Heisman Trophy ceremony as a finalist. So I also have Ohio State winning, though. I have by a little bit of a bigger margin than you. I have it 34-21. I think the Buckeyes defense will do enough to stifle Curtis Rourke in that passing attack, while I really struggle to see how Indiana's going to contain these weapons that Ohio State has offensively. So I think the Hoosiers will suffer their first loss of the season, and that could ultimately, Dolan, be fatal for their college football playoff hopes at an 11-1 record. We'll see what happens with the committee if they do end up losing this game. By how much they lose could also be a huge talking point as well. But I got Ohio State winning by 13 over Indiana in what is the biggest game of the weekend. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.